Well, so yes, you point out a great point here. The fact that there are some PowerShell commands that we need to have in place in order to turn on and off particular features. For example, one of the ones that we have at the moment is the ability to turn on and off DNS. At the moment, you can only actually do it through ARM, and you have to go into your ARM template. So yes, we're working now on having a PowerShell set of commands, particularly to turn on and off things like DNS
features
and any of those features. So I think you'll see us that we're working on that behind. As we're working on that now. Yes.
Yeah.
At the moment, unfortunately, you have to do some of these things through ARM, and that's not the easiest things to do, especially when you have a cluster-wide feature setting you want to turn on and off.
Okay, so there's a bunch of questions here from the 6-Foot Games. So let's see if we can handle some of these. Client-to-node security without enabling node. We've been able to get any kind of client. Yeah, that is possible. It's not how we would normally recommend things get configured, because normally we like to see security for the cluster communication as well. So that is technically possible, but I don't know that we have great support for it. It also probably depends upon which client APIs you're using. So for HTTP, I know you can absolutely set that up, but I don't know if that's actually possible for the TCP-based communication. But
there are definitely different certificates for the client node security and the node-to-node. There are two different certificates you can set. Generally, what tends to happen is that the default through the portal is it uses the same one. But in the ARM templates, there are separate ones.
Yeah, I think if you look inside the cluster configuration, you should be able to configure it. But if you can't, I would say open up an issue for that one.
I'd be curious to know why you wouldn't want node-to-node security, though.
Yeah.
That's sort of an odd thing to know.
I think that follows up the second thing here. He's asking about performance between nodes as a result of this.
Well, I don't think there's going to be much of a performance difference. Yeah. I mean, the node-to-node security is just the nodes talking to each other. It has nothing to do with your applications.
Yeah,
this is just whether or not if a random VM or machine showed up, should it be allowed to join the cluster?
Yeah,
and node-to-node security would prevent that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really want the cluster.
Yeah, you have a question here about service remoting performance. Again, that's application layer stuff. This has absolutely nothing to do with application layer stuff. So the node-to-node security is just the machines talking to each other to form the cluster, but it has nothing to do with how your services actually communicate with each other.
There's a third way to add a certificate-based security on the cluster after it's created for on-prem. You can add a certificate without recreating the cluster. On-prem, you actually can, yes.
I mean, I think you might be able to, but the upgrade process. Yeah, I know we specifically don't allow it in Azure because we know it won't work.
That's done.
But I think it has the same problem, which is usually if you're adding security to the cluster, midway through the cluster can't talk to itself anymore because some of the nodes don't have the security permissions to talk to the rest. So it's that same problem. You're making it more restrictive, and so the cluster can't communicate.
I want to double check on that. So.
Yeah, but normally the answer is no. Same restrictions apply.
Fourth, when using Windows security, can Windows identities specified to be a group? Yes, they can. And users can therefore be granted access for group membership. Yes, they can. Yes. You can do anything inside AAD in terms of group membership to be applied to the group account that the cluster runs under. So yes, that's a very classic way to use a group managed account in order to do that. It works very well with the security on premise using Active Directory. Oh, there's more. Gosh. Finally, we're having trouble securing client to node access with our on-prem cluster to AD Windows security. Again, not using node security, perhaps a problem.
I think for this one, I would say either open up a support ticket or come to the GitHub issues list, and we can look at the errors that you're actually getting and work through that with you to try and figure out what about if there's something wrong in the doc, or maybe there's some step that's going on, what the issue is there. Sorry that open an issue. I'm sorry that keeps being a theme, but for things that it feels like it's close, but there's going to be some back and forth. That's normally where we would want to take it, just so we get out of other people's way here. But thank you for bringing it up. It should work, and those do sound like reasonable configurations. Other than the changing the cluster from insecure to secure, that's basically not going to work because of the communication issues that it introduces.
We will work on looking at the docs better than if there are some issues inside that.
Yeah, I think that's also what we need to follow up on.
Okay, make a note of that. Thank you.
So Gray
Okay,
X.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, internal stateless service seems to be recommending a port for each instance. Can you clarify what you mean there? I'm actually not really following.
Yeah. So we're in the process of moving over an old not in the process, looking at moving over a web API endpoint. So something that exposes our stuff externally outside the load balancer, and then we have our stateless services inside of the cluster itself. And in the .NET Core documentation, it says that I believe it's saying each instance of the stateless .NET Core service is going to have its own port, and then you have the ability to expose that port. So it's getting us a little confused. I thought that's what the naming service was for.
Where do you see the .NET Core documentation? In our documentation or in?
Yes.
Are you talking about ASP.NET Core?
.NET Core it's the reliable services documentation, I believe. .NET Core reliable services, possibly.
Maybe send a link to that, and let me take a look at that real quick, just so
Can you plunk a link in? We'll know which one you're talking about. But
just so I have an idea what you're talking about.
Just in general, there's two separate things, and it's important to get these right. There's the port that a service actually starts listening on a given machine, right? Which usually comes from the operating system or from the operating system in conjunction with Service Fabric.
Right.
And then whatever that address is that service ends up listening on, it gives back to Service Fabric, and we advertise that as the address of the service. So that's what naming stores. Naming keeps the map between the service name and here are the addresses for the service. So naming isn't really involved in deciding what port gets allocated or anything like that. That's all local.
Yeah, that's what I had thought too. And when reading, I just put the link in at the bottom. When reading that link, it got a little confusing, as if almost each instance, and it's about, let me see how far down the page here. We were looking at the best practices for scenarios and configurations down, and there's an internal only ASP.NET Core stateless service.
Yeah, so it is ASP.NET Core. Okay, you're talking about the dynamically assigned port configuration.
Yes. So are we saying then that each instance is going to get its own port, and we have to sort of plan for exposing a larger pool of ports? Because I mean, that could grow pretty quickly based upon how many instances you have of that service.
Yeah, I mean, generally we recommend if it's internal to the cluster, then you should use dynamically assigned ports, where you just let Service Fabric pick a port out of the application port range, which you can make as large as you want, but by default I think it's 10,000, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
You just let it pick a port for you. That way you don't have to worry about one service stepping on another service's port or any port collisions or anything like that.
So this is just pulling from that range. And then the thing that was a little confusing is it seemed like this will not be available to call externally, right? We're still going to have to go through the web server that we're writing. We're calling it Endpoint, right? So we've got this endpoint exposed. And you're still going to have to, we don't want that port to be exposed externally. I don't think it would.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the idea. Sure. The idea is if you do have something that's exposed externally, then you want it on a well-known port, because your client applications, they're not going to be doing service discovery
most of the time. Yeah.
And you also need to make sure that you expose only a limited number of ports out to the public internet. So you usually use a fixed port that clients expect. So if it's an HTTP-based client, then you just use ports 80 and 443, for example.
Right.
But then anything internally, it doesn't really matter what port you use, because your services are using the naming service, the service discovery mechanism, to get that information. So it's all kind of dynamic.
Yeah.
So you let them use dynamic ports. That way you avoid port collisions. And your service authors, as you're writing services or deploying services, you don't have to look for what ports are available to you. You just let the system pick one.
Exactly. And that's what we thought. Just quick clarification there. If I happen to choose the right port that was dynamically assigned and I was trying to connect to the cluster externally, would I be able to connect or not? It's more of a security question.
Well, you wouldn't, because the port wouldn't be opened up through your load balancer or through your NSG. So all those would be closed off to the public internet.
To the internet. What about internally from my LAN?
Internally, well, it depends on how you're connecting to it. So if it's from within the cluster, if you're not coming inbound through a load balancer or NSG, then yeah, of course you can connect to it.
Yeah, I mean,
then it's just open.
It depends on what the rules for your VNets are, or what other network.
Yeah. And right now we're not blocking anything.
But basically, when we allocate that port, we punch a hole in the firewall for that node.
Yep.
But after that, whether or not something can actually ping that machine or not is up to a bunch of other configurations.
Yeah, that's really more the networking configuration. So if you have, for example, 2 node types and each node type has its own NSG, then they won't be able to crosstalk on those dynamic ports unless you specifically open them up. But within the network security group and within the VNet, then they can all see each other and they can all talk to each other.
Awesome, thank you.
Marcina asked about reliable collection performance. There was some performance work done, but I mean, if you're seeing something dramatic, it's possible we just hit your scenario perfectly. But there was some general performance done, but nothing huge, nothing dramatic. We should probably do better about publishing performance numbers each release. That's something that we're going to be working on getting better at, so that we don't have to, guess.
Yeah, we jumped past the question as well on the X509 security key versus the asymmetric key. I'm not too sure what is this being. Can you just tell us where you're referencing this? You said this might be a break between .NET Core 1.0 and 2.0. This is for when communicating to the cluster. Can you just point out where you think this is, where you're actually using this, just so we understand this a bit more? Just not too clear on that one.
Do we want to proceed while we?
Yeah, let's proceed by posting more on that. Just give us some more information about where you're using that. And where you see it you encounter it all.
It's a good idea to move classical cloud service web roles to a container-based cluster.
I mean, it depends on what you want to get out of it. It's a good idea if you want to take advantage of some of the other platform features in Service Fabric, if you want to take advantage of rolling upgrades, if you want to write more services, or if you want to expand your architecture into more microservice style architecture, then yeah, absolutely. If you're perfectly happy with web roles and everything's going fine and you don't plan on doing any of that, then probably just stay there.
Yeah, I mean, the containerization thing is also like, what are you trying to get out of containers?
Exactly. Right? Yeah, right.
What are the containers really giving you?
It's more of a. I think it's more of a question for you. What benefits do you see in making that move?
Yeah, but there are two questions here, isn't it? Moving from cloud service to Service Fabric. Yeah, and then deciding whether containers is the choice or not.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's specifically asking about web roles. So if you want to pick up the web role, which is an IIS application, and run it on Service Fabric, you have to put it into a container. That's the only way to do it.
If you want to modernize it.
Yeah, unless you want to modernize it or rewrite it on ASP.NET Core, then you have some other options. But if it's just, I just want to lift it up and put it somewhere else,
right.
You just have to look at the platform features and see if those are going to benefit you and if you want to make use of those.
Yeah, I mean, it really does depend on whether or not you want to invest in this application to modernize it, if things about the way the web roles work are getting in your way. So, some of the new VM sizes aren't available in traditional cloud services. If that's a problem for your web service, then that might be a reason to move to Service Fabric and move to VM scale sets as a way of getting those modern role sizes. But unless you're running into those types of problems, if things are working fine and you don't really need to modernize the application in any way, then you can stay there. It's really up to you.
We have some guidance in our docs we've hopefully discovered on moving from cloud
on how to do it.
Yeah, so there's some architectural guidance.
Yep.
I mean, generally, as the Service Fabric team, we say, yep, of course, come on over. But personally, I'd say if it ain't broken, don't fix it.
Yep. Advice on including endpoint web server in each application versus deploying an instance of the endpoint in every application.
So yeah, that was again similar to what we were doing before. Is that we've written a web server to allow us to connect externally. Now, not every single application is going to have a need to be exposed. Some are only going to be web services or smaller web methods will only be used within the cluster itself. But a lot of times developers want to run locally and maybe fire up a presentation or a GUI application and test against a specific web service in a specific environment. So the endpoint's going to need to be exposed to access it from outside of the cluster. I'm trying to understand any guidance or thoughts, and I'm sure it's up to you, but any guidance or thoughts on, should we create a copy of this web server inside of every application, or package the web server as its own application and then have all of the microservices interact with it that way?
To do testing locally?
No, well, part of it's to testing locally. Many applications may need to be used out. Right now, we're in a completely non-Service Fabric environment, right? We have very little in Service Fabric. A majority of our development is outside. So as we slowly move things into that Service Fabric environment, we need to connect these outside applications to the applications inside of the Service Fabric environment. The only way to do that is with an endpoint. So the question is, do we wrap up that endpoint, that web server, as its own application, or should we put a copy of that endpoint microservice inside of every application?
Oh, I see. I'd probably do individual applications.
Yeah, that's kind of that's the way I'd lean as well.
Because that's going to be a lot cleaner. You can still, I mean, locally on your local developer machine, obviously you can hit everything because it's all just the same. It's the same computer.
Right.
So
right.
you can test everything out. Like if you're talking about, I'm developing a web service that's going to be internal only, but I want to hit that endpoint so I can test it to make sure it works. You can do all that locally without any additional setup.
Right. Well, we have a bunch of web applications and MVC applications that may call 9 non-Service Fabric web services and 1 Service Fabric web service. Mm-hmm. So it's going to have to hit an endpoint to run locally, and it may go against a certain set of data. So you go against the test data set or whatever. Yeah. So you're saying put a copy of that web server along with every Service Fabric application that may need to be called externally?
The external ones? No, I mean usually I would mock those kinds of things out. So you'd have some, I mean, usually you have some API layer that you can mock out, so you don't actually have to make a request to external web servers, at least for local development and for testing. But you don't necessarily need to bring all those things into the cluster either if they're external. So these are just external web services you're talking about, right? So you have a service running in Service Fabric. It's a web app. It makes some calls out to other Service Fabric applications, but also to things external, right?
So no, I don't think I'm being clear. I'm sorry. So if I've got, I had to write an endpoint to allow me to call into the cluster from an outside application. Mm-hmm. That's a microservice. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the question is, do I take that microservice and deploy it alone with nothing else, and then have it forward requests to things inside the application, or do I take that microservice and package it inside of the applications that contain the other microservices?
Either way is fine. Either way is fine, and I would. It depends on scalability questions. It depends on configuration. It depends on how you want to upgrade them, whether or not you want them to be upgraded together or separately.
That's what I was thinking too. Is like if you want to, have 6 of them calling the same thing, you upgrade the one, you're going to be upgrading all 6. Versus if you want to version the actual web server itself, then you could have it inside of the apps, right?
So I think the maximum flexibility is to include it, and so you have many different configured web front ends for all your other services. Yeah. That gives you the most flexibility. You could decide to, if that ever becomes for some reason too much overhead, you could consolidate them into one just kind of API serving layer as a separate application. Either is fine. For flexibility, I'd go with 1 per for now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any roadmap or ETA around open source and ETA for pub sub actors?
Let's take the open source one. I think a lot of our Linux drive has been over the last year to make sure that we could consolidate our code bases together and make sure that we sort of brought that all together. And I think that helped was a lot of things why we were making sure that we sort of aligned across 2 different platforms. I think with that out of the way, I mean we're certainly talk about on a roadmap of where we want to open source Service Fabric. There's no question on that. I think now we're starting to kind of get down to the actual nitty-gritty of what that means to do that. And I think that you'll see some more announcements of that in the next few months.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll get some more concrete guidance for you about when that's expected to show up and what the steps are going to be.
I think we just had to get to this Linux release first so that we kind of aligned so much code that had to be aligned across 2 platforms in order to achieve that. Yeah. As for the Orleans one.
So we're talking a bit with the Orleans team on how we can kind of consolidate 2 actor frameworks. I don't have a lot of details or timelines yet, but there's some stuff going on there. Unfortunately, I can't say too much just yet because we don't know a whole lot yet.
Yes.
But we're talking about it a little bit because we want to bring features like Orleans streams onto Service Fabric.
Yes.
So stay tuned for that, but nothing concrete yet.
We've noticed DNS does not seem to start up right away, and some of our services which are trying to remote to other services via hostname fail to do so after they're deployed. I mean, I would say that you always have to deal with this, regardless of whether it's startup or not. But when you say DNS, is this you're going via the DNS names that you're specifying now for your actual Service Fabric services? I ask because you're saying you're trying to remote via hostname. or you're trying to connect via hostname, I typically think of as the name of the machine, not the name of the service. DNS is also heavily cached, like everywhere. So if that's a thing, then it might name specified in the application manifest. Okay, so that's probably just a race condition then, yeah, internal to the cluster.
Yeah,
Okay.
hopefully the DNS service, I mean, it's like all the services, it should start when the cluster starts. Usually starts.
But even then, the name when you get registered, it's not instantaneous.
Yeah.
Yes. So yeah, because there is some TTL, so it's not instantaneous. But the DNS service though should start when the cluster is started up.
Yeah.
So you might want to open up a Git issue to see, so that we can actually figure out what's going on there.
Yeah, if it's consistently reproing
Yeah.
where it's not quick, we should look at why it's not quick.
Yeah.
Okay, is there a performance difference between services hosted in Service Fabric and services hosted in worker roles?
It depends on what your service does.
Yeah.
I mean, short answer, no, because it's still just a process running on a VM.
Yeah.
And depending on what that process is doing and how you have it set up and configured will make all the difference. But again, there's no magic. There's no magic in terms of performance on Service Fabric. It's still you're running .NET code on a VM and it's doing stuff. And in worker roles, you're doing the exact same thing.
Yep. So on the whole, no major difference. Now, if that service is stateful, then you might be able to architect it differently with
Exactly.
Service Fabric in order to get some performance differences. But other than that, it's just a process running on a machine. There's nothing special.
The next one's a good one, which about when's .NET 2.0 Core available on Windows images.
.NET Core. So yeah, so we're looking at ways to have .NET Core 2 a runtime available in clusters when you create them. Not necessarily in the VM images themselves, because the VM images are universal. So anytime they get created outside of Service Fabric or inside, right? But we're looking at ways so that when you set up the cluster, it will just be there. And so we're working on it right now.
Yeah. Yeah, but in the meantime, you're right. An extension is the best way to get it in.
Yeah, extension is the best way. The .NET Core actually has a pretty convenient, the runtime, they provide a setup script, a PowerShell script that will just go and do all the installations for you. So it's pretty convenient to set it up yourself through an extension if you want to do that today.
I forgot to press this one.
We do want to do that for you automatically in the future.
Okay.
I imagine someone's written an extension for this already.
It's possible, yeah. I mean, it wouldn't be hard. You can even do, it doesn't even have to be an extension necessarily. There's just setup scripts you can run when you start your VMs.
Okay. Following suggestion for versioning the separate services from within VSTS. Are you? I presume you're talking about an upgrade. There's a couple of different ways to do it, and I think that VSTS actually has an upgrade task that lets you specify how to increment the version numbers. Not talking about VSTS. What did I do?
No, there's two answers.
I
two
see.
questions here. One about VSTS
And one about general, yeah.
I see. And I skipped Michael's. So that's why I'm confused. I'm sorry, Michael.
I mean, while we're on the VSTS theme, it does have auto versioning for
Yeah.
things you check in there, and they do have a way of providing different semantic versioning that you use.
Yeah.
If it's not using VSTS, then you actually have to figure this thing out by hand with scripts you do yourself.
Yeah, it's a bit more of a pain if you're doing it outside of VSTS. For automating, I mean, we've seen people stuff hashes or things like that inside as the version numbers. Service Fabric doesn't really care what the version number is. It's just a string to us.
Okay, I'll do.
We gotta need someone.
Working on it. Okay. So Service Fabric doesn't really care what the version numbers are. They could be SHAs, they could be strings, they could be word names. It doesn't really matter. The key thing is generating them and shoving them in there before you build the package. So we've written, I mean, there are some basic tools. The VSTS tasks are also open source. So you might be able to go grab those VSTS deployment tasks and upgrade tasks and see how they're doing it. And then clone that for your local pipeline. I think we'd also be interested to know a little bit more about how you're doing deployments if it's not via VSTS, because if you're using some other CI/CD pipeline, that's good for us to know as a data point.
We also, I mean, publish on the Linux side, some Jenkins
City.
deployment scripts. We've actually seen people use Jenkins quite a bit, sort of on the Windows side as well.
Team City.
Team City, yes. Okay.
We have seen some people use that one as well.
Yeah,
the integration is a little trickier
We
there.
spend so much time with Team City. I think it's worth us looking at how we publish more with Jenkins, because we've had that asked quite a bit. We know Octopus Deploy integrated with Service Fabric. Yes, we haven't spent time on Team City. That's a good point. We could spend some more time on figuring out how Team City would be a better integration with Service Fabric.
Marcin asked about differences in the leasing between Windows and Linux. I mean, we haven't really seen a big difference between the different modes. Theoretically, user mode is going to be worse, but it hasn't been a big deal yet.
At the end of the day, I would say, from the scenario point of view, I think it doesn't really affect it. We are still doing equally well on Linux. So how the sausage is being made under the hood is slightly different in these cases. That's it.
Implementation details, I think, is the term you're looking for.
Close. Is it possible to use your own image for setting up the cluster in Azure? Yep, you can totally do that. And then will Microsoft take care of patching the OS? Kinda. So there's when you talk about patching, there's two different ways to think about patching. One is installing the patches that land on Patch Tuesday monthly, and then there's the patching of actually getting those patches into the image so that the next time a new VM gets provisioned, it's not missing a whole bunch of patches that then have to be downloaded and installed and configured. Service Fabric ships, we provide you what we call the patch orchestration application, which will handle Patch Tuesday. So we take care of rolling those patches out in the cluster so that the cluster stays healthy and we understand what's deployed there. However, nobody today will handle updating the image. So whether it's a custom image or whether it's your image or you're using something that Azure provided, the image stays the base image. And so if it were your image, you'd have to slipstream the new patches into the base image and then provide that new base image and then use that going forward. Azure VM scale sets are providing image-based patching soon.
Very soon, yes. I think they've rolled it out in preview. I think they rolled it out. I'm pretty sure they rolled it out.
If it's not, if there isn't a preview for it, then there will be soon. But that's the solution for Azure provided images. Is VM scale sets will be updating the image periodically, and then you'd be able to select into those updated images. This is basically what you get in cloud services today. That's showing up in VM scale sets. But for a custom image, no, you'd have to go update the image. The patch orchestration application will do the regular patches and things that are, a hotfix comes out that addresses a security vulnerability, right? Those will get installed.
Well, actually, it'll do everything for you. The problem is when you add or remove nodes, it takes longer.
It takes longer.
Yes.
So
yeah, nodes. Yes. Okay. Let's keep moving on. What's the next one?
From Tony.
Reliable collections in Service Fabric Explorer.
The Explorer.
When is that going to be available?
Yes, I showed that. I mean, that was a great piece of work that we've done, and actually, we're actually working to have it integrated at the moment. There's two pieces to it, actually. If you go and look at the slides, we did actually open source a plugin that has a REST endpoint that uses OData that just demonstrated how it could find the collections inside there and expose them all out. The bit that we're having to just put in the Service Fabric itself is just the Explorer that's inside, the viewer that's inside the Service Fabric Explorer, which we're getting integrated at the moment. So in the next release, probably maybe release after that, so that you'll see that will appear, and then effectively you'll have the combination of including this plugin with your app, and then that viewer will be there. So we're working on it, yes, but I don't have a specific date for it right now.
I think that covers Marcin's question as well.
Yes, a lot of people are very interested in that thing, and we realize that there's always a hole, and so we're pretty excited to try and get it out sooner. We just want to make sure that we have a bunch of just finishing pieces of some of the design of it and get included.
Marcin's question is, when do the native reliable collections ship? The answer is as soon as we've done some more testing to make sure that they're good. We're using them for the system services first to work through any issues. Then we have to figure out how to expose the managed APIs and how to what that whole thing is going to look like. So they might show up sooner, but then you'll still have to figure out how to use them, and that's what we're going to try and get that guidance straight first.
And the next plan, just so we're clear, next planned release we have, which is our 6.1, is around December timeframe. So that's what we're working towards as a release for next set of features and capabilities.
Next question is Service Fabric on Linux on-prem.
Yeah, so we are working on it, and I don't have an exact timeline for you, but it should be in the upcoming months. Then did we skip over that question with the backup viewer?
No, we answered that.
We answered
And
that.
Mark just answered.
Oh, well, there's a backup viewer as
It's
well.
the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Is Service Fabric on Linux on-prem going to be a Christmas gift?
Don't promise.
That's a loaded question.
Unlikely.
Unlikely. All right. Just checking.
All right, guys, we're over halfway, and we've got
We're working
a
on
bunch
it.
to get
That
to.
is,
We're working on it.
we're working on it.
Okay. Excellent.
Any plans on the roadmap for Service Fabric to include a replicate to another region sort of functionality? And if so, we'll include test failover. And if replication works to a various region, are there any examples you can point me to of an SF cluster running across multiple regions? Well, we actually demoed that at Ignite. That was in a session that Chaco did. I don't have somebody can find the link session code.
It's a blog post.
Yeah, on the blog post. Look for Chaco's session. So that totally works today. It's a little tricky to set up because networking in Azure is a little tricky sometimes. But that cross-regional thing already works today. If you're interested in that type of scenario, I'd say contact us offline because we have the guidance on it is a little thin publicly. I'm working on making that better. But basically, yeah, you'd have a single cluster that spans multiple regions, and then failover works just like failover normally works. So if you wanted to test it with chaos or whatever, that would be the same. That's the benefit of a single cluster that's multi-region. Is that everything ends up working basically the same as it would on single nodes. Next, upgrade path to the primary node type when upgrading the operating system. Upgrading 2012 R2 data center to 2016 to support containers. Manny, I think you went through this recently.
Yeah, so I cannot see the question because Skype went to the very end.
This is an upgrade path for the primary node type.
Upgrading.
How do you upgrade the primary
It
node?
was the
type?
conversation you had the other day.
Yeah, so in this particular case, what you are looking for is you should add a node, but basically you remove one node. So upgrading between operating systems is what you're asking, and there is no upgrade path that is supported. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to remove a node and add a node with 2016 on it, and you'll have a mixed OS cluster at that point, which is fine, so Fabric can handle it, and then go through that loop several times for your primary node type.
So we'll work on getting an updated guidance out there for how to do it, and then hopefully also, when we talk about improving the tooling, this is the kind of thing that we'd like to put top-level commands on the cluster for, so that it's much more automatable and that you don't have to learn the process. You just state what you want to have happen. Christine asks, can I use Azure RMU's rolling OS upgrade instead of patch orchestration service? Is it recommended or discouraged? I think, again, if we don't, I don't know about that one.
I don't know the answer to that one, yeah.
I don't know how well it
Integrates.
communicates with us and integrates
Well,
with us.
so here's the thing. You can try it. If we know that it's dangerous, we've tried to block these types of OS level or VMS level commands. But on the whole, I would do it the Service Fabric way rather than operating at the infrastructure level, because sometimes it doesn't integrate quite as well as we'd like.
I think this is a good question we need to spend.
Yeah, we should ask Chaco. I wish he were here because he'd probably know.
Well, this is relatively newish yet.
That's the thing, is that it's also a new VMSS
GitHub
capability.
issue.
Yeah. So Skype said this didn't post. Yeah, we've all been there.
It did though. This was
this one did.
.NET Core being
Yeah.
installed in VMs. Yeah,
Okay.
that was already posted there.
Then 6 Foot Games followed up about their certificate question from way back when. I think the original question had to do with X509 security key versus X509 asymmetric security key.
Yeah. Maybe you should ask the question.
No, it's okay. I think that this one's going to end up being I would take that one to an issue, and then we can see the whole kind of client and server side, how it's configured. and then figure out what's gotten disconnected.
But is this? It sounds like this is a question between .NET Core 1 and 2, where they made some changes there. So you might actually have, if it's specifically about that and using JWT tokens in your applications.
Yes.
If it's a difference between .NET Core 1 and 2, you might have better luck going to one of the .NET Core forums or repos. And asking
I just want to make sure that I know that we probably have issues in our docs where we've documented the ASP.NET Core one way. And
I don't.
none of this.
I don't think so. I can double check, but I would probably recommend asking that to the .NET Core team. They'd probably be able to answer that a little bit better for you than we could. It sounds pretty specific to them.
That makes sense.
I'm not too sure on it.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we haven't documented something standard.
So Marcin asks about story behind containers. Can I continue to use containers? I like the Service Fabric application model better, given Docker quality, etc., etc.
I mean, if you like the Service Fabric application model better, I think that's perfectly
And
fine
use
to
it.
use that over containers. I mean, we're not moving towards a container only usage. If you like the application process model, then just use it.
So there's no worries about the application model
Going
future.
away,
So
yeah.
I mean, so Service Fabric as a product will always support orchestrating whatever you hand it that can run. So whether that's EXEs or whether that's containers, and the application model will always be there, so you can continue to use that. We're having some discussions about features that are specific to containers that we want to make use of in the future. So there will be additional things that will start to light up around containers, but it doesn't mean you have to make the switch. Generally, we say, when we hear people say that they want to move everything over to containers, first question we ask is why? What do you want to get out of containers? And if the answer is I don't know or I have nothing really, then you can stick with what you have right now, and that works just fine. Especially if you're doing shared process hosting, and if that application model is working for you, then just continue to use it. That's fine.
Yeah, especially since the Service Fabric application model also supports resource governance, which is one of the reasons why people tend to use containers,
Right.
since that's also fun.
Yeah.
Patching of Windows containers sounds annoying, but that's not Service Fabric.
Correct.
But any advice? Unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that here. You still have to own that, and you still have to publish your images and everything. However, we are talking with Windows to see what can be done to make life a little simpler, but I don't have any better answer for you right now.
Yeah, the whole idea of having to put down a new layer every time we have a patch cycle, if you guys could find some way working with your counterparts, I think people would choose Service Fabric as an orchestrator for Windows containers.
Yeah, it's kind of we understand your pain, but at the same time, container images are supposed to be this immutable thing that you don't want to change as well.
Yeah, very true, very true.
So but I feel your pain, and we are exploring what are the best options that we can provide customers.
Well, let me tell you the reason behind the question, just to see if you give me any other advice. I'm getting, right now we have a technology infrastructure team, and we are working in an on-premise situation where they maintain all of the patches. And as I push for Service Fabric to being an orchestrator of containers, they're pushing back against the Windows containers because it changes the patch model so much. I'm going to keep working on it, but that's where I'm coming from.
It changes the patch model in terms of their familiar with patching of machines.
Yeah, they're using SCCM to patch all of the VMs right now, right? And we would have to go ahead and rebuild every application and redeploy every application every patch Tuesday.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Containers.
I can see how that'd be a pain.
Now, well, I mean, this is the first step, right? The first step is lift and shift off the VMs and put it into containers. The second step would be to modernize the applications and just run them as native Service Fabric applications and not have to deal with patching in OS to deal with orchestration. But yeah, that first step is still there.
Yeah. So unfortunately, I don't have any answer for you. Better answer for you in the immediate term. The long term, perhaps, if you're running HyperV containers, maybe, we can let you patch inside the HyperV container and get patches that way. But again, this is not, let me not promise something that this is not going to happen in the next few months.
Yeah, no.
But we are talking with Windows on how to solve this.
Yeah, but it's good feedback, though. I mean, it's definitely something that we need to think about because we're always looking for ways to make that, the management of infrastructure a little bit easier on everybody, and that includes OS patching.
Yeah.
So that's really good feedback, Greg. We appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any
guidance on stage deployments of cloud services? We want to be able to deploy a new version of the application, test it upon reflection. Okay, so there's ways to do this if you're using if all your services are stateless. You can do this, and there's a couple posts on Stack Overflow that I have around A/B testing, because we support running applications, different application versions side by side. So you can have application version 1 and 2 just running side by side in the same cluster. The part that you have to kind of do yourself today is the traffic routing portion, which there's a couple ways that you can solve that. You can solve that by doing load balancer configurations with backend port pools. So it's one way you can do it. You can have the load balancer say port 80 on the front end going to port 8000 on the back, which is version 1, and then switch to port 8002, which is your version 2 on the back end. So that's one way you can do it. It really depends on how your ingress traffic is configured there. So yeah, so you can do that. The other way, of course, to do it is you can stand up a whole new cluster and then change your DNS point to new cluster. However, we usually don't recommend that because that tends to be a little more trouble than it's worth. It's not built in the same way that it is in cloud services. So I would look at search for blue-green testing in Service Fabric on Stack Overflow. There's a pretty detailed explanation on how that works. And then the traffic routing is just the thing that you have to figure out. We're doing a little bit of work there as well. We're trying to come up with a way to make that traffic routing for ingress traffic a little bit easier on you as well, and that'll include being able to do A/B testing just as easy as you did in cloud services. But for now, that part you have to do kind of on your own. Okay, where were we?
Scheduling service. Is there anything on the roadmap? I see that another unnamed orchestrator is working on a scheduler. I was writing my own, but it seems like core functionality. It would be great if it was out of the box.
Yeah, we don't have anything out of the box today, and there's no real time frame for it. It is something that we know we probably need to do. It would be interesting to know what you're trying to schedule and what the scenario is where you're going to be starting up services and shutting them down on some sort of regular basis.
Maybe a better way, I don't know if a scheduling service is the best name for it, but think of it similar to Windows Task Scheduler, right? I've got a lot of batch and you could do BAT, you could do command line, you could do PowerShell things that run on a schedule. And if I was able to host those don't have the roadblock of being hosted through IIS, so I could move those directly over into a native Service Fabric microservice and bring a good chunk of code into Service Fabric quickly. So it's really something like Windows Task Scheduler. Now you may view it as spinning up and spinning down the service, or maybe something more of just sending requests to services that are already running. You don't necessarily have to shut the service down. But a lot of enterprises have a lot of things that run off of Windows Task Scheduler.
Yeah, one way I've seen people do this with actually running actor services, because actor services have reminders, which are kind of these highly available scheduling mechanisms. So what I've seen people do is they'll spin up an actor service, and all the actor instance does is it acts as the scheduler with a reminder. And so when that reminder fires, it'll use the Fabric client APIs to create a service instance to go run the job. That's where the actual code lives, is in a different service. And the reminder is just a way to create that service, let it do its job, and then spin it back down. Or, like you said, if you don't want to be spinning up services, it can just issue an HTTP request to the service to instruct to go do something. So I see people do it that way. That's one way you can accomplish it.
Another thing that I've seen people do is they use the Azure cron, the Azure scheduler that already exists, to poke their Service Fabric cluster and give it instructions for what to do. Depending on what you're trying to do, that may be sufficient.
Yeah, and I could do some. I could still keep Task Scheduler. I mean, I'm on-prem, so I could still have my batch server run Task Scheduler and have it poke an HTTP endpoint. But it just seems like this is a pretty common thing. As far as using the actor service, realize we're going to want to be doing things like on the 3rd business day of the month, I want to do this.
Yep.
And more of on a task scheduler kind of thing, then I'm necessarily going to do it every day, or I may want to do it once an hour between the hours of 5 and 7 a.m. to p.m. or something, whatever.
Yep, noted. Okay, we're into the lightning round as we find ourselves every single time. So we'll try to get through some of these as quickly as possible.
There's only about 6, 7 left.
Yeah, I
Great.
think we're done.
Well, until they hear they're running out of time, and then all the questions come in. Issue about unsigned DLLs for 3.0 preview.
Yeah, I think we'll have to.
Do you know what that's about?
Yeah, actually, so I know we have a fix for that.
We missed some.
I think he brought this up last month, actually.
Well, these are the ones we just released, yes.
Yeah,
He's talking about the 3 preview.
Right. I know we have a fix for that now. We have signed DLLs. It's just a matter of we just have to get them out released to you. If you want to get early access to those, I'd say open up a GitHub issue and we can probably get you a build a little bit earlier to try out. But in our next release, you should get signed DLLs, which should be in probably about a month's time.
Message from Marco. Transport channel message header. Voss?
Hold on, we missed.
Yeah.
We missed
Here am I.
Yes, he has
wait.
a await function to delete a service, and he's asking that sometimes the .exe file is still running on the node when you use fabric client.service-manager.delete service async.
I did not see this message.
I see.
You see? Yeah. But it doesn't seem to delete the service or the execute.
Well, so the exe can still be running. Okay, so this is again that shared hosting model. If you have by default, if you don't specify otherwise, when you create multiple service instances of the same type, they share a host process. And same with stateful services. If it's partitioned, the replicas of a stateful service will also share a same host process. So you can delete a service instance, but the host process may still be up because it's hosting other instances of the same service. So that's one possibility that can happen. So that exe will still be there.
If you delete the whole application,
yeah, delete the entire application. So deleting the entire application should cause all exes to terminate. So if the exes are still hanging around, there's a possibility that somewhere in your service code there is something running that isn't responding to the request to shut down. And that's actually a pretty common issue that we see with services. It's in 2 places. One is in the run async method in a service. If you don't honor that cancellation token, the cancellation token is basically the signal to shut down. So if you don't honor that, if you have a long-running I/O operation or
it's
something,
just looping forever.
or it's just looping forever and it's just sitting there, then we won't terminate it by force for a little while. So it'll continue to run for, I don't know, how long is it, like a few days, a week or something before we terminate it.
Yeah, it's
with
pretty.
extreme prejudice.
We're pretty generous.
It's pretty generous, yeah. So make sure you're honoring the cancellation token. The other place is in your communication listener. If you have a custom endpoint that you set up, a custom, an actual custom listener, like you wrote a bunch of code to open up a socket or something, there's an open and a close method, and we'll wait for that close method to complete before we shut down the service and kill the process. And so that could be something like, that could even be an ASP.NET Core service or something where you have a bunch of outstanding requests that are waiting for completion. So those are a couple things to look out for. Otherwise, they should shut down. In a normal case, when you just delete the application, the processes should all shut down. So if they're not, I would check in your service code to see if there's anything preventing it.
Now back to the
transport channel message header.
Is the transport channel message header the only way to add arbitrary parameters to any service I can recall? If I want to add a correlation token, I have to customize a transport listener. Yeah, that's actually the way to do it. There's the message headers. We actually have a sample up for this, I believe, up on GitHub. If you search for it, there's this
adding custom headers to the.
Yeah, this scenario in particular was for adding a correlation ID to the transport headers. So yeah, the message headers are the place to do it if you're using service proxy or actor proxy. I don't know if it's strictly the only way, but it is probably going to be the most obvious and best way to do it.
Question on. Go on.
Yeah, just to be sure, where can I find the sample you are referring to? The one you.
Let me find it and post it I'll post it in the chat box here.
Yeah.
I'll look it up real quick.
So there's a question on monitoring on Linux. Anything similar to EDW? Yeah, so we do have LTTNG. I think Money mentioned it in the chat. The traces are not as formalized and organized as on the Windows side, so we're working on that. But you can get the entire dump via LTTNG.
Plan to co-locate containers all pods. The answer was yes. Yeah. I think you can technically do it today if you crack open the service manifest and have multiple code packages and yada yada. But
Yeah.
yes, that's totally something we're going to make easier. Template to build a multi-region cluster. We're going. Mark pointed to Chacos. Chacos should be updated based on what we did in Ignite. Paulo, feel free to share yours as well. I know we worked on that one for a while. But either of those or whatever, there's a whole bunch of different ways to do it, so I imagine that multiple examples is going to be useful. Availability zones are public. Yes, we plan to support AZs explicitly. I don't think we do that quite yet today because some of the fault domain information we're still looking for, but that is something we need to do. And they are close enough that, yeah, it's kind of like running just a bigger cluster. Global or multi-region clusters are really when you want to survive a regional failure. So whether or not you build a cluster that spans, if you build a cluster that spans racks, which is the default, you survive rack failure. If you span across AZs, you survive zonal failure. If you span across regions, you survive regional failure. Each of these has a corresponding increase in overall latency. You have to decide if the complexity of the connectivity getting it set up, the cost, and the latency are worth it for the application that is in question. There's really nothing special about it from a service fabric perspective. So it's up to you whether or not you want to span these types of things. I would say span zones if they're available. Not all regions are going to have zones, however, so you're kind of in a pickle there. But from service fabric, sure, go ahead.
So I understand if they fix up the fault domain information, which is totally messed up today, you are going to try to support it using the cross-zone VMSs, which are apparently public. I have seen them in one Ignite talk, so they are public, obviously. So this is the way you are going to support this, through the cross-zone VMSs.
I mean, that's our plan when we get to zones. I think you could even do it today if you manually updated the information, but it's, from us, they're just the more machines. We don't really care what the machines are. That's the same way that the cross-regional ones work.
Okay, thanks.
Is the SF infrastructure service going to support planned maintenance? I don't think we have plans to do that yet, but that's a good question. That's something we need to figure out how to do it. I don't know if somebody wants to write that one down to take back to Chaco.
Yeah, I'm writing that one down.
Okay. That's Mark's response.
Yeah, I was just plugging the Service Fabric customers. Yesterday we posted a profile on Alaska Airlines and how it's the one that we talked about, the build, and how they used and moved the Alaska Airlines ticketing system onto Service Fabric using containers. I think it's a good story, and if you want to work with us and we can get a writer to help you write up a story that you're interested in, feel free to drop me an email, and we're more than happy to work with you. People enjoy reading your experiences from a developer perspective.
And
We just got one more question.
well, there's Marcin said something about running system services on secondary node types. There's no way to do that. We don't recommend or allow any particular workload to span node types today because of the fault domain information is not consistent across VM scale sets. So the reason you can't find a setting for it is that it doesn't exist. So that at least makes sense. Cluster
But it means that if the primary region fails, then the entire cluster fails.
Look at the templates that are sent out. The primary node type ends up spanning multiple scale sets, just in different regions.
Okay.
And there's a way to set up the fault domain information that respects that.
Yes, I see the fault domain overrides. Yes, but I will have another glimpse because okay.
Yep, it's multiple scale sets is the answer. But let's keep going. Any last thing? Allow the cluster management service to change VM queues. Same deal. Same sort of question that we answered earlier around.
You can, yeah.
It is doable, but it is manual.
Yeah.
And the last one from Marco.
Oh.
I think not yet. Yeah.
No, we haven't updated that one for V2 yet. But Okay, whew, in under the wire, in at the wire.
Good
Made
stuff.
it.
Yeah. Right on
All
time.
right.
Ta-da.
Cool.
Thank you, everybody,
Thanks, guys.
and we'll see you next month.
And thanks for doing the survey as well. The reason why we wanted to do that is we wanted to see if these things were valuable and whether we should do it more often or at different time zones or anything else like this. So please give us feedback around this.
Yep.
Because we want to continue being very open with you and kind of giving you a chance to ask questions. And as always, GitHub Issues is your friend.
Yep.
Yes. And Stack Overflow for everything else.
Yep.
Stack Overflow is also your friend.
Yep.
Yes. Cool. So
Okay.
we'll see you guys.
All right.
See you guys there.
See you next month. Thanks, everybody.
Right. Bye.